Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a meeting of the Montgomery County Council's Education and Culture Committee. I apologize. I'm actually having some technical difficulties. I know Councilmember Dewando is experiencing the same thing as well. And so um, I think he may try and join on in a moment, but want to welcome everyone. And I want us to go ahead and get started and not be delayed by the fact that we're having some of these technical challenges, which we know always happens. It's certainly understandable. I want to start off with our Montgomery County Public Schools. I know that we had originally had the order and set our Montgomery College to go first, but I know that MCPS has a prior engagement and so therefore has to go. So I want to welcome Dr. Monifa McKnight, Ms. Linda Farrell, Mr. Jimmy DeAndrea, Mr. Derek Turner, Deanne Collins, Helen Nixon, Nikki Hazel, Thomas Klausing, and Yvonne Alfonso Windsor, all to the meeting. And just want to say thank you very much for being a part of this call. This is to talk about the 2.5-year plan for MCPS and also the summer and fall operations, what we're looking to do as far as setting up for this summer to make sure that our students are prepared, and then for the fall as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez to walk us through the packet. But did want to first turn it over to Dr. McKnight if you have any opening comments, our acting superintendent of Montgomery County Public Schools.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Rice. It looks like I am also having a technical difficulty. I have been trying to click video, but I am only getting a dark screen.
It is that type of day. Trust me, I understand.
Okay, so I'll keep my fingers crossed that video comes up. If not, hopefully my voice is coming across. I want to thank you and the council for having us here to speak with you all today. There is a lot of progress that's happened in our school system over the past few months. And so we're here today just to share some updates on some previous priorities that we have been able to speak to you about in the past, but in more detail. So again, we look forward to coming back and sharing this information with the council and in many ways showing our appreciation for your support in many of these efforts that we've been able to start in MCPS and continue. So thank you. Ms. Rodriguez, I'll pause there and turn it over to you.
Yes, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, you can go ahead and walk us through the packet.
Thank you, Chair Rice and Dr. McKnight. Welcome on. Thank you, everyone from MCPS who attended today's committee meeting. I'll be brief. The packet for today summarizes the summer and fall operations for Montgomery County Public Schools, as well as their 2.5-year plan. Montgomery County Public Schools has a presentation for the committee, so I'm happy to share it and move through the slides if that's preferred. And we can start going through that as well if there are no other questions before we start. Okay, and seeing that, I'm going to pull up the presentation now.
Thank you. All right, I will go ahead and kick it off. Team, thank you again for being here with us today. We are pleased to be here with you and discuss Montgomery County Public Schools strategic priorities, and most importantly, give you an update on the many resources that we are putting in place to support implementation for our students and staff moving forward. As Councilmember Rice mentioned, I'm here today joined by a number of our MCPS staff leaders. We have Dr. Helen Nixon, who is the Associate Superintendent for Human Resources and Development. Ms. Nikki Hazel is here with us as the Associate Superintendent for Curriculum and Instructional Programs. Ms. Rochelle Rubin, the Associate Superintendent for Student and Family Support and Engagement, and Mr. Pete Chavanini, the Associate Superintendent for Technology and Innovation. Next slide, please. So I'm starting out with this graphic that I know is familiar to many of you, because this is a graphic that we brought to council prior to this meeting in discussing some of our priorities for our budget. So the priorities that you're going to hear about today really stems from this graphic, which represents our 2.5-year plan. This plan overall really does get in and hone in on reflecting the needs of our students as they have evolved during the pandemic, as well as really focusing on what we already knew about our students and potential gaps prior to the pandemic, and most importantly, how we look forward to moving our students forward. So as we prepare to bring students back for in-person learning instruction 5 days a week with a teacher in front of them for every single student when the school year starts for our 2021 and 22 school year, we absolutely have to recognize that some of our students are going to enter our classrooms this fall in a way that's been impacted, one, by COVID-19 and its many associated effects. And in some ways, we've been able to gauge that through many interventions that we have in place now. But we're going to learn even more when we have those students in the building with us, sitting in front of our staff and collaborating with families to really get a true understanding of what that impact has been. So as a result, we already know that our students' academic, social, and emotional needs are going to be great obligations to them, and we have to plan for what those obligations will look like to meet our students' needs. And we have to meet their needs exactly where they are, depending on, again, gauging what the impact has been and remaining committed to the fact that every single one of our students, we have to be committed to meeting their needs wherever they are and being able to differentiate based on what that need is. So while we're aware of the adverse impact of the pandemic on our students and our families and our staff, we acknowledge that there are increased levels of stress that have been imposed on our families. Some, to name a few that we've talked about here at council before, unemployment, that has been one big factor that we know have impacted our community. Food insecurity on many levels became a true reality for us. I'll go back to the numbers, millions of numbers that we gave over the summer in terms of the meals that we've served since the pandemic. And we have to be able to grow stronger and become more resilient than we have been in the past year and a half. And quite frankly, the resilience has to be a driving force behind many of the innovations that we develop in returning our students and staff back in the fall in a more robust way. And as I speak about those innovation ideas, we know that a big part of us leveraging innovation is going to be connected to creating a vision to make our student experience better than it was prior to the pandemic. And I'll give you one specific example that will speak to this. The virtual environment, we know and acknowledge, was very challenging for some of our students. Again, we moved into a format of educating our students that has not been one that's been implemented ever before in the history of education. So as we've learned about what that impact was and acknowledged that there was a challenge for some of our students, we also know that there have been some students who've had positive experiences as a point of leveraging the virtual platform. So how do we learn from that moving forward? Knowing that in some ways, traditional structures have created some barriers for us for access and opportunity for our students. And so we want to really learn from all of those spaces. And so a guiding principle behind the strategic priorities that you're going to hear more about today is all about how we put our students first and to reiterate their needs first and acknowledging that many of them are going to come back into our school buildings with many different needs. So this does require that we have a paradigm shift in how we provide supports to our students in a way that's really different from what we've done in the past. This approach is really going to be about how we deploy our resources on the basis of moving from just looking at the number of students that we have in our school buildings and how students that we're serving, and moving towards instead acting on what the needs of our students are based on knowing what those significant needs are. So in this graphic, I'll just point out to you those 4 areas that you've seen before that are represented on the outside of the circle in green. And the first is our priority of mitigating learning disruption across our schools so that we can address the impact and inequities that the school closures may have provided for our students and reducing those in-person learning opportunities that we need to recover from. The second is us focusing on our most poverty impacted schools. We've talked about this before, but this is an opportunity for us to enhance the resources that we have and utilize our staff in a way to eliminate barriers that students face in trying to receive their education and knowing what those barriers are. Third, we're really going to focus on supporting our students and their well-being and attend to the entire child so that they can be available for the education that we're providing to them. And that includes focusing on their social and emotional needs and mental health. As an example, later on in this presentation, you're going to hear more about how we are working to align ongoing work around reimagining school safety and student well-being and how that's connected to a number of priorities that I know the council also have an interest in. And the fourth area on the outer part of this graphic is the circle representing digital learning and support opportunities. so that we can build on, as I was just speaking of, the learning that occurred during COVID-19 and really maximize our potential for utilizing digital tools to enhance the educational experience and offer students with an opportunity to receive a more comprehensive program through a virtual environment. So those are the areas that you've heard about before. Today, we're going to go into more detail about those areas and how we are planning for implementation to support our student needs. I do want to hit on the inner circle in this graphic. This is one that we may not have spoken much about, but it really gets at the importance of creating an infrastructure in MCPS that provides us to leverage those outer circles in a more robust way. And those areas focus on policy, operations, human resources, and budgeting so that we can leverage the components of the outer circle in a really cohesive way for our students. So these are the priorities that are a starting point behind our investments in student learning. And now I'm going to share with you how we actually utilize those investments more specifically. So in this graphic, I'm going to focus on that inner circle that I was just talking about, the policy, operations, human resources, and budgeting. And I'm going to really hone in on human resources and operational for just a moment here. Again, not an area that we've spoken a lot about. But we have to shift our attention from our outer priority circles to really looking at that inner circle, because that represents, like I said, structure that allows us to be able to coordinate our efforts in a cohesive way that will allow us to sustain some of the learning we've had over the past year for now and in the future. And I'll start with our student needs really being the force that has to drive how we organize and implement infrastructure in MCPS. So when we think about organizational structure, there are a few examples that I'll share with you. Our MCPS organizational configuration that will be effective July 1 is one that is designed specifically to focus on the goal of minimizing disruption without sacrificing our ability to make significant and notable progress towards meeting student needs and advancing our priorities. To do so, when we think about the organizational structure, leadership structure in the district, I have distributed responsibility for contributors to student learning across 6 chiefs whose roles are listed here. And the roles that you see listed on the left side of this chart really get at how do we bring the work that is supportive to our schools closer to central office, and how do we leverage a lot of these leadership positions in ways that have really brought forward areas of support in our system that did not exist before COVID-19. And so that's one example of what I'll share there. All of our work really has to be grounded in collective trust and do it within a culture of respect. Throughout this pandemic, it has been quite impactful on our entire community. As you know, all of us having the experience of having students out of school and receiving learning on the virtual platform only for a significant amount of time have just elevated in so many ways and made, quite frankly, a lot of our trust vulnerable when our stakeholders have really looked at the traditional structures of education and had to adjust, quite frankly, overnight into supporting their students in their homes in a very different way. So us rebuilding that trust within our system is going to be key. And that's a big part of what we're focusing on as a school system, in rebuilding that trust with internal and external stakeholders who really do support MCPS and the vision of our school system being one of the nation's best. And it has to be, and that cannot be compromised. The leadership team is also going to work collectively to make sure we focus on 3 areas: communicating, collaborating, and coordinating with our internal and external stakeholders to ensure that we're coordinating across offices and schools. The closer we come to schools and the reality of what our students and families are experiencing, the better for us, because that becomes more informative to our work. And so I truly do look forward to us returning in the fall to talk about opening of schools for in-person instruction 5 days a week with a teacher in the classroom, so that you are able to make the connection between how those investments are truly impacting our student needs and the implementation of our organizational structure and how it's coordinated with much of that. The second area that you see on the slide is around focusing on human resources and staff utilization. So in order to meet our student diverse needs, our schools have to be equipped with the adults who are going to prepare them for academic, social, emotional, and mental health growth. This has always been important, but because of the pandemic, that becomes even more important. And so when we think about that, we really have to say what drives us to invest in positions and partner with community organizations that we haven't had to do in the past that will allow us to get at those areas. To give you some examples of human resources and how we're utilizing staff differently, I'll name just a few positions that don't represent the wide variety of work that the system has had to do in traditional terms, but will become very much a part of our future. Social workers, mental health therapists, must be a part of our plan moving forward. First. Secondly, I'll talk about our newcomer coordinator. We know we have a number of unaccompanied minors that will be enrolling into our schools and our school system, and we have to start from learning from 2017 and on when we had a number of students enroll into our school system, and not just enroll them, but start at the jump of how do we ensure that they're going to be successful. And so planning for how we utilize staffing to onboard our newcomers will be really important. All of our human capital resources have to align with the Maryland Blueprint for Education, because that's been the basis of much of our funding. So we know that we will have a coordinator who will work with the county in partnership with the school system to really have a close look at how we're implementing that blueprint and doing it with fidelity to support the needs within Montgomery County. So those are just some examples of human resources and staff utilization that have shifted a bit. In terms of operations, we all know as a result of COVID-19, we've had to make some significant adjustments to uphold our record of operational excellence. I'll first start with our meal services and the costs that have been associated with them. So we know this year we have spent roughly $11 million in providing student meals, and we were able to do that through the U.S. Department of Agriculture meal waiver program that have been in place. And what that program does is it provides meals to our students who may not qualify for free and reduced meal programs traditionally. Well, this is an example of a program, and I'm thinking about meal services when I say this, which did have revenue in the past, but we are not receiving any revenue for that program at this point in time, and nor will we receive as much revenue given the fact that this waiver continues into next year. So I point that out because as that waiver extends, that's also an expense that the school system will occur. That's very different from what we've done in the expense that we've had to incur in the past. And it's important to note those types of expenses because they do represent significant funding sources, or I'll say like significant funding needs that have not been represented as clearly in the past. And then the last that I'll mention here, which is another operational upgrade, I'll say, is how we've had to navigate utilizing community navigators to do our work. Before in our school system, yes, we may have put a lot of information out via our website to our parents, through connected messaging. We've learned through COVID-19 that we have to utilize our community leaders and stakeholders to help us connect with families, particularly those families who we may not have been able to connect with successfully before the pandemic and have learned new and better ways to do that. So we have invested and think about our operational work in connecting with families in very different ways. I'll give a few examples. Door knocking have been one. We've done several door knocking events in our community. I'll mention a few: Greencastle, Gaithersburg, Glen Haven, Newport Mill, Einstein High School. Schools are all communities that have allowed for there to be direct engagement with families through door knocking efforts. We also have held MCPS mobile pop-up shops is a way to engage our community. So we've set up pop-up shops at different locations across the county to assist our families with summer and fall registration, to assist them with technology use, and to make connections on how they can receive vaccinations. So we have a number of other opportunities coming up that represent the door knocking efforts and pop-up shops. But this is really important because this represents a new way of how we connect with our community that I actually think makes us better than who we've been in the past, to make sure and make sure that we're connecting with all of our families and communicating with them all as a priority. And we have to think about how we do that in different ways. So our stakeholder partnerships still do exist. We continue to work with our faith-based organizations and others. We're actually doing a food distribution event in connection with Kingdom Fellowship AME on Saturday, June 26th. And we will continue to work with them as well as our other partners to provide needs to our communities. And then finally, our vaccination areas support another big area of operations. So our families really depend on us to make the information user-friendly to them and to help coordinate how we can help them get those services done. We have had vaccination sites at Argyle, Montgomery Village, and Blair and Paint Branch High Schools. To this point, we've been able to provide 2,000 MCPS students age 12 and above to receive their vaccinations through their clinics. And this has been a tremendous effort for our community. I cannot express this enough. I am so proud that our region in Montgomery County have been represented as one of the areas, the most highest achieving areas to provide vaccination rates to our students 12 and above. And I want to thank our council for being partners and supporting us and being able to do that. The future of technology is also the final thing that I'll mention in terms of operations. Councilmember Rice, and we spoke about this before, this goes beyond when we really think about the future of technology, us just providing an online opportunity for our students. But there are a number of experiences we want to provide to them. Like, for instance, we've learned that opportunities like internships may have presented challenges for our students to get in the cars and drives and provide transportation to different areas that are within our community and outside of our community for our students to really get experience to on the ground work that's important to them that relates to career and college readiness. So really thinking about what is the technology infrastructure that will provide moving forward those levels of flexibility, and really soliciting in an authentic way our staff's opinion and input on what that technology need is huge in the step of us really taking a step back and looking at our infrastructure. So again, focusing on some of those operational adjustments that have just not existed in terms of a need in the way that they have in the past with where we are now. And the next two slides, I will just quickly go over some of the federal funding that's been available to us in MCPS. Thankfully, we know when we started in this pandemic, we were very concerned about the funding sources that were available and what it could mean for us at that time. And I just want to walk through very quickly with you. There are 4 funding streams that we have leveraged to respond to COVID-19, to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we've effectively used those funds to really meet our students' needs and how they have began and will continue to evolve as we move through this pandemic and the aftermath of it. And first, of course, we have our annual operating budget. And as we shared with you before, the 2.5-year plan was funded as an initial investment in our operating budget, and it represented $30 million. That was broken down into those 4 areas that represent the outer circle that I mentioned earlier. Those operating budget dollars are not reflected in this chart in front of you, but the operating budget is always the central component of our funding picture. In addition to the operating budget, there are 3 one-time federal funding streams that MCPS has been able to benefit from that is shown on this chart. The first one you'll see here is represented as the 2020 CARES Act funds. And this includes the first round of elementary and secondary emergency relief funds that is formerly known, that really is known also as ESSER 1. So the CARES Act funding really did help us stand up continuity of learning when COVID-19 first hit us in the spring a year ago. And when you think about CARES funding, what I will liken that to is the CARES funding is what was in place to get us through the spring. The second funding source that you'll see here is the $112 million that is available to us in the ESSER 2 funds. And this was appropriated at the end of the calendar year 2020. I like to think about ESSER 2 as the funds that came at a time that allowed us to be able to be rescued for some of the impact of COVID-19, but also allowed us to plan for a bit of stabilization. And then the third funding source that you'll see here, which were included in the March passage of the American Rescue Plan, is ESSER 3 funds. And today our discussion of resources is going to focus on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds and their relationship with the priorities identified in the 2.5-year plan. And when I think about ESSER 3 funding, I like to align that to how that funding source represents recovery and specific strategic investment for the system moving forward. Next slide. And so this slide really focuses on the ESSER 2 investments. So let's dive deeper in depth about ESSER 2 and its funding to unpack how we've leveraged that money. So as I mentioned, Congress passed this legislation associated with ESSER 2 in late 2020, and we received our share of that appropriation this spring, so just a few months ago. We're currently drawing on ESSER 2 funds to stabilize the school system from the pandemic and the way that it imposed itself in ways that we could not particularly prepare for. And especially we can look at this chart and see that there was stability that was secured through significant investment through certain areas that you'll see called out here very clearly. One, tutoring and interventions became very important because we needed to provide students time in addition to the school day to get caught up on their learning. Summer school. This was going to be a significant effort for us to invite families in, for students who we could look at data and see who had a significant impact and have them come in for in-person learning and participate also in virtual spaces that allowed us to be able to get access to more students. But summer school was another area that we really had to make significant efforts in to make that happen. Technology, we all know we had to immediately pivot to using technology in ways and make sure that we had technology that was working for our students and our staff so that they could continue to leverage that environment. And fourth, professional development. Professional development is really important because we can put all of these supports in place, but if we do not invest in training and supporting our staff so that they can implement this to the highest level appropriate to make an impact on our students, then we have to, then say we have the structures and resources, but we've got to prepare the workforce to implement them in a meaningful way to students. And so that's why you see a significant area of investment there in professional development. And that's also why I'll point back to our organizational structure. You'll see that we focused on coordinating system efforts and organizing around a priority of professional development as well. So having these funds available to support these areas really do build a bridge between our, I'd say, educational model and how we needed to operate during the pandemic and investments that we need to make through the operating budget as we return to full-time in-person instruction. The next slide, ESSER 3 funding, and we received this in the amount of $252.1 million. We turn to ESSER 3 funding, and we use this funding to really anticipate how this is all going to come together in the Maryland State of Education blueprint and how that really forms opportunity for us as a school system. So under federal law with ESSER 3, we are required to spend 20% or 1/5 of the dollars we receive to address learning disruption and loss that resulted from the pandemic. So that's a starting point for us for ESSER 3 funding. It has to be focused in that area. And as we've also discussed, doing so already is absolutely our first priority. So that is consistent. If the ESSER 2 funds were about rescuing our school system, I'd say ESSER 3 is really focused, as I said, about recovering from the pandemic. And that means we have to look at the needs right now and also be prepared to use ESSER 3 funding as we better are able to define what those needs are when we are able to put eyes on our students in the classrooms and really do some significant assessments around where they are and what the impact has been. So in MCPS, that truly means that ESSER 3 funds are going to be strategically, they're going to strategically augment our investments in the 4 outlined priority areas that are in the 2.5-year plan as we reopen. So I wanted to build that framing for you because as we think about the funding, and I'll pause there before the staff goes into exactly what these areas are and how that investment is going to directly tie into the plan that we have for our students this summer and the fall. I wanted you to get a big picture understanding of what all the funding sources have been that have come through the school system and how we have and will continue to plan and utilize this funding. So I will pause there, Councilmember Rice, to see if there are any questions about what I've shared thus far before I turn it over to Ms. Hazel regarding any specifics around the area of mitigating learning disruption. And if you'd like for us to continue, we can do that as well.
I have a question.
Yes.
And so do I after you, Nancy. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Superintendent McKnight, for that presentation. And thank you to all of you who are here. This is the stellar leadership of MCPS. I'm really excited to see everybody and really appreciate the presentation as well. I wanted to first start by acknowledging what you said regarding how, as our students start to come back, is when we will begin to really understand the degree of the issues and the challenges facing our students and families. It's something that I know I've been really concerned about for quite a while. And it's inevitable that both the school system and all of our departments are going to have to prepare for to address many of the issues that right now don't seem apparent. So I appreciate that you are addressing this issue through that lens. I know the Annie Casey Foundation just published their kids count 2021 and has ranked Maryland, I think, 24th out of 50, which apparently we're going in the wrong direction, but it really is the result of COVID-19 pandemic. So we are all really trying to focus on these issues. So a couple of things that I just wanted to ask about. I know that we've been also, I think, fortunate in some ways that we had a lot of infrastructure in place and we've been able to address a lot of issues very quickly and retool very quickly. Some of the things that, of course, have come up are these collaborations with, like, let's say, the hubs and, interdepartmental work and things of that nature. I assume that as you are looking and working through this plan, that is going to be part of the priority, is to continue that kind of partnerships, because it's going to be impossible for the school system to do it alone, for county government to do it alone, et cetera. So I was interested in hearing a little bit more about that. And also regarding the concept of community schools, which we have been working on for so long, how does that framework fit into this moment where we know that we're going to have to do even more than we have in the past? And of course, equity, right? I mean, this has been front and center for a school system like ours that is 73% of color, knowing what we know regarding the pandemic and the zip codes that were most disproportionately affected, which is where our Black and brown populations are concentrated. We know that that is going to be also an issue that is going to be reflected when the students come back. So I was curious about those pieces, right? The sort of community schools framework, how is that embedded in what you just discussed? How are you going to take advantage of the infrastructure that we set in place that are still there? Something that I'm really curious. And I love the newcomer coordinator. I feel like that is going to be an important position, not just for unaccompanied minors, but also a lot of students that, are here, may have come with interrupted education, et cetera, and need that extra support, is something that we've heard for a long time. So if you could just elaborate a little bit about, in terms of those particular pieces, I want to make sure that those are embedded and that we're building on that, because there are things that we have invested in the past. And I want to make sure that we're still leveraging that kind of infrastructure.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Councilmember Navarro, for raising those key points, because this is what it's all about, the very parts that you mentioned. I'll work backwards from your question. And the first one was about community schools. So I don't want to take her thunder, but I know Dr. Nixon is going to talk a bit about that when we talk about most poverty impacted schools. And so a big part of that work has started years before, a few years back. And so we have not lost that and have been able and been trying to align exactly how that priority continues to fit into the Maryland blueprint. And so she'll talk more about that, and Ms. Rubin will as well. So we'll come back to that, because that's the part that we want to be able to pull out. Secondly, working with our community partners, and I use the example of, we want to be better than we were before the pandemic. And we've heard from our community partners in ways and in which they want to be able to help the system. And in some ways, we've had a lot of operations set up, and we had to figure out how they fit into that. Now we've actually flipped that thought on its head, and it's how do we engage them in visioning from the very beginning? And you mentioned our equity hubs. they served a specific and needed resource to us at a time where we could not have done it independently as a school system during COVID-19. And we've learned so much from that. They actually inspired us in working with the county government to say, Equity Hub being one, but how do we also connect with a number of the other partners that really helped us through the pandemic to come up with a menu of services that we can provide to our students and families during that out of school time? We know there are breaks that are represented in our extended year schools, in which, families traditionally have had to try to figure out, well, where's my child going to go? What are they going to do? It's actually a great connector there. There are also times in which our families will want to be able to say, how can I help support my child when we are able to identify exactly what the impact has been from the pandemic on them, in additional resources to help catch them up and support. So having that menu of out of school time partners, with our Equity Hubs being one, is a big part of what we plan to roll out in the fall to be a benefit to our families and to actually showcase lessons learned from all of those community stakeholders who have been significant partners to us during this time. And then third, equity is still at the core of our work. I was going to talk about that as we close out, but that's the basis of all of this. And as we define equity, that truly is, how do we get every student what they need? And yes, that's always been our charge to do that. But during this pandemic, we've had to do several things. One, get to know our students and their families even at a more personal and closer level, because we've had to support them in ways that we've not in the past had to do that. So we want to utilize that knowledge to say, how can we differentiate the supports for our families and yet keep the expectation there for all of our students to get what they need and be successful. And that's looking at what those gaps were, whether they were represented by race, culture, a number of other areas before, and now being even more intentional with how we have to elevate that focus of equity. And so our anti-racist audit, which we've started and launched, is very much a part of us continuing to discover what those areas of vulnerability have been for our students that we have just not been able to acknowledge in the past as we've moved forward in implementing the work, but maybe not in a way that's meaningful to all of our students and all of our staff. So that remains at the forefront of our work, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much for that. I have found myself often, reflecting on and discussing how this pandemic has had so many lessons, have shown and taught us so many lessons. One of them, I think, has been just a very tangible understanding of the issues around equity. And that at times when people tend to get a little bit nervous about these concepts because they believe it's taking something away from somebody to give to somebody else, the pandemic really has come to show us that if we are not willing to address these disparities, whatever they might be, in this particular case, a virus that is invisible, that doesn't stop to ask you for, your background, et cetera, if we don't address that, it comes back and it affects all of us. And I think it's very similar to how we look at institutions like our school system, that if we don't address in a significant way, an intentional way, the issues affecting our children of color, who are the ones who are most disproportionately affected when you look at all the data, it then has an effect on the quality of the entire institution. And so I feel like there are these parallels that we must utilize to frame a lot of this conversation. And I can only assume that as students return, these issues are going to become even more apparent. And obviously, they're going to be a bit more exacerbated, which then calls for the leadership, not just of the school system, but, county council, the executive or state delegation, everyone, to prioritize investments and to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable to respond. Because if not, we're going to see, erosion of quality of education and so many other aspects of our life here in the county. So I so much appreciate that you are keeping this front and center, but that you're also framing this in a way that all parents can understand, and that we can all, again, hopefully be on the same page to mitigate this, so that we can stay true to these goals of high quality education for all. It's just going to be so critical around this time. I really appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Navarro. And let me just say, I couldn't agree with you more. It really is going to be imperative for us to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success in building off of opportunities. Unfortunately, COVID was something that we know was negative, but it actually presented us with some opportunities to rebuild our system stronger than it was before, to address some of the current inequities that we've seen, that we've been trying to address, but has accelerated the ability for us to be able to really take these things head on. So I really thank you for raising that. I couldn't agree with you more that it's imperative for us to do that now. So let me turn to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. Rice, and appreciate the whole team. And Dr. McKnight, sorry, can't see you. I'm sure I'll see you soon, hopefully in person. Great to see the rest of the team. Couple questions, and if it's appropriate to pause on one of them because you're going to get to it in the presentation, that's fine. But it was good to see the overall, I think, big picture of how much funds have been received thanks to the federal aid. And then obviously what you're looking at in the next 2.5 years to put in a plan that can help all of our students who, as has been mentioned, unprecedented need. I wanted to ask something specific about the summer programming, the extended school year and the summer programming. And while I'm really glad we're offering it in a more robust nature, I have heard some things about the transportation aspect of it. And so I want to know what's going on there. I don't want to, what I've heard, I'll tell you what I've heard, you tell me if it's right, because it's always dangerous when you say you've heard something. But that there will not be transportation provided for some of these summer programming. And I want to know if that's true, confirm that. If not, correct my statement. And if so, what's the reasoning? I'm assuming it would be financial or logistical, because obviously we're all concerned. We know for the conversation we've just been having, we want our students to have access. For those who need transportation, that obviously is a significant barrier just any time of year, but certainly during the summer. So if whoever's appropriate to answer that, please.
So I'll jump in there, Councilmember Jawando. First, thank you for making us aware that that is some discussion that is occurring. Transportation should not be a limiting factor in terms of our students who are returning for in-person learning. Any stakeholder that may be experiencing some hardship with that, if you could just let us know so that we can better understand what that particular situation is, we will do that. The one factor I will say that's different for us this year is that we are opening all of our schools. We started out providing summer school services to all of our schools, which is very different from what we've done in the past. Now, of course, as we've set up a program to do such, we've never had to provide transportation for all of our schools, but we had to wait and see exactly what that enrollment would look like so that we could be able to support transportation needs and in some cases combine some programs. Like we start out, we're going to provide summer school in all of our schools to encourage all of our families to participate. But after we have gone through a phase of staffing and recognizing that, okay, we may want to increase the use of staffing by providing some programs depending on the number of students that are involved, we would have to make some adjustments there. So that's where we are, but that definitely should not represent students who we want to come in person to be able to get back into our building. So there are no issues that we are aware of.
Share with you all the folks that I heard that from. And there's a big school system, there can be miscommunications. So, right. So I'll definitely do that. Great. I'm really happy to hear that. The second question, as far as and again, this might be one we wait until Ms. Rubin and others speak. I know we're going to talk about the social, emotional, and mental health for our students. What are we doing on the educator side of that? Because obviously it's been hard on everyone. And I know you all know that. And I just want to acknowledge that for, we did a panel in my office on women in the workforce, and we actually had an educator who had 3 kids at home who was trying to manage that and manage, on teaching herself. And obviously, I know that's not an isolated incident. So what are we doing on that side of the house?
Absolutely. And I will let Ms. Rubin speak to that when we get to talking about social emotional wellness for our students, because they do come hand in hand, and thinking about what our staff needs are so that they can be the best that they can be to serve our students. I will say this, we would have to think about ways to work smarter and really take into consideration the impact that the pandemic has had on our staff in order to implement any of this work moving forward. One, we need to learn from it and think about better ways to do it. Like, we were just having this conversation, we were having a meeting, and we said, well, while we're all in our offices, we still can actually get on Zoom, and that takes transportation time from moving from another building, or moving to another building for a meeting. And those are the types of things that we're learning from, and really even taking a step back to look at some of our policies that really supported some of those traditional ways to be able to provide some level of transformation moving forward, and thinking about the needs of our students and how we can support our staff in that way. So Ms. Rubin will speak to that part when we come to that. Okay.
All right, we'll come back to that. And then the last thing, I'm assuming I know you all, because you always keep good data, you'll be tracking, but I just want an assurance of this, and also request that you all keep us posted on the committee of, participation in the summer programming. I'd love to hear a report back, if you're not prepared to do so today, about who has signed up from where, and, as we're addressing, again, students that have been most highly impacted, their families, those students, those communities, which we are tracking in a number of arenas, on the health side, on the housing side, all of that's overlaying. And I just think we're going to really want to know how that's coming out as we head into the new school year. And I'm sure you all want to know that too, so you can tailor the appropriate interventions and supports in the fall. But I just think it's going to be important for us to be up to speed on that as well.
I couldn't agree more, Councilmember Jawando. It starts with us holding ourselves accountable for what we say is important and actually doing that. And we can't do it unless we're monitoring the impact of much of the implementation of these plans. I mean, we've actually been excited about the type of outreach we've done for summer school, and really keeping the data on all of our student groups. And we'll actually follow up and share that information with the council, because it's information that we've been really happy to say that the students who we've been inviting in, particularly who need another level of services, have been a key component, and they represent the majority of our enrollment in summer school.
Right.
So we have been tracking that data, and we'll continue to do so. And as you indicated, the next part is, the first step was getting them in, getting them enrolled, and getting them into the program. The next step is, what has been the impact, so that we can know what it is, how that may indicate the next step in the fall. So
Absolutely.
we will absolutely do so. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Well, I can tell you this parent is looking forward to summer school, and not in this house. Say that. So, but thank you all very much. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. All right, back to you, Dr. McKnight.
All right, we will continue, and at this point, I will transition to Ms. Hazel, who's going to just start sharing some of the more specific priorities for mitigating learning disruption across schools, so that you'll be able to see what some of the plans have been coming out of our 2.5-year work group that included a number of stakeholders in terms of starting strategies for the summer and for the fall. And I frame that with acknowledging that these work groups will continue over the next couple of years, because we want to continue to evolve based on what Councilmember Jawando just said, what we learn and what we want to keep doing, what we want to stop doing, and what we want to start doing. And that's where that accountability of the data and the impact on students in all of these programs will truly give us a good understanding of that. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Hazel at this time.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight, and good afternoon, everyone. So I will just share about the mitigation of learning work, and understanding that you all have heard some of the information, but just will go into more detail. The purpose of the mitigation of learning work is to develop programs and strategies that address unlearned content and learning loss that has occurred during the pandemic. We want to ensure as our goal that our students are on or above grade level as it relates to those grade level standards. And so the work of this committee is going to be really important to addressing that. The district has been using data, and we will continue to use internal and external data to determine where our students are and how to best meet their needs. And so as we talk about these areas today, a lot of that is based on data we're using to determine what programs are best for students. So I'll focus on 4 critical areas. First, summer school and how we are meeting the needs of our students with summer school and outreach. We'll talk about curricular adjustments, professional learning, and our before and after school tutoring program. So first, with the summer school, we are going to be offering both in-person and virtual learning opportunities for our students. We will be addressing that unlearned content, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, and also providing opportunities for students to take courses for credit. Most of the students who are in our K-8 program are going to participate in person. We do have a small percentage of our students who are going to remain virtual. And our grade 9 through 12 credit-bearing courses will continue to be online, as they always have been for the last several years. The Mitigation of Learning Committee focused on summer outreach, and you heard Dr. McKnight talk about the community navigators work. And so we partnered with community navigators, other offices, and community members, and we are really excited that almost 52,000 students have registered for summer school in grades kindergarten through grade 12. This is the largest number of students that have ever registered for a summer program. Last year, we were at 35,000, and we were really happy with that number. So to be at almost 52 was really impressive. And we are also really excited that the student demographic really mirrors that of our school district. And so as Dr. McKnight shared, we use data to really target and invite specific students to the program. And most of those students did respond to that invitation. And while we're really excited about the number of students who registered for summer school, it was not without its challenges. Many of you know that in neighboring school districts, staffing was a challenge. And we have worked really hard and have been really creative to address our staffing for this school year, or for the summer. And so we really want to acknowledge the work of Office of Human Resources and Development in terms of their creativity with finding staff, but also because of the financial incentives that we offered our teachers and our support professionals. That also really helped to encourage many of them to make the decision to teach this summer. So we're pleased that most of our in-program, in-school programs are fully staffed, and most of our extended school year programs and our virtual programs are going to be staffed. We have another week and we are doing heavy recruiting, but we feel very confident that we will have all of those programs staffed for the beginning of July. Next, to talk about the adjustments we made to the curriculum. Over the school year with our virtual program and the virtual platform, we did need to make adjustments to the curriculum to accommodate that schedule. And we carefully studied and consulted with curriculum experts before making those intentional adjustments or omissions to lessons. And as a result, the curriculum team has now developed a 2 to 3 year plan. And we've developed guidance documents for teachers to address how we will teach the concepts and skills that were missed during the school year. Additionally, Our research, both internally and also nationwide, has shown that mathematics was the most impacted content area during the pandemic. And therefore, we have created a comprehensive multi-year plan to support students who were struggling even prior to the pandemic, but also students who had some missed opportunities during the pandemic. But we also acknowledge that there are many students who were able to maintain and stay on grade level and require enrichment or acceleration. So we don't want to forget those students as well. Our plan really does help to identify the needs of our students who require English language development. It will also focus on the needs of students who have IEPs or 504 plans. And so we will be using our ongoing data to monitor and adjust our approach. As Dr. McKnight said, working with our community members to take a look at data periodically to make decisions about how to best meet the needs of our students. The next area, professional learning. Our overarching focus will be the implementation of new curriculum. We're in our third year of new curriculum implementation, but embedded in that will be how we address that unlearned content and how we address the needs of those students who might be really struggling or were struggling prior to the pandemic. And we also will be embedding those social emotional needs into our content instruction. Additionally, our professional learning will also address the emotional and academic needs of those students who are unaccompanied youth coming to us in the fall. And our professional development will be both synchronous and asynchronous. And finally, the after school and before school tutoring. We have done a lot of research that shows us that high dosage tutoring makes a significant difference for students and as they come back to school and are dealing with that recovery of learning. And so during this past school year with our CARES funding, we did implement before and after school tutoring through the use of our MCPS staff. And we also partnered with an external vendor called TutorMe, and they provided tutoring online for students in all academic areas. So we're going to continue with both of those services throughout the summer. And then in the fall, not only will we continue with the tutoring program from our MCPS staff, but we will then also provide an opportunity for others to propose a plan to be involved with tutoring. So we are going to post a request for proposal to have additional external vendors who are able to provide mathematics or literacy tutoring for our students before, during, or after school. And we will select a few vendors to support our students at the kindergarten through grade 12 level. So we will really make sure that those students who need that tutoring in literacy or mathematics receive it, and then we will have touch points along the way to monitor and see how those students are doing. So at this point, I am going to stop and turn it over to Dr. Nixon, who's going to talk about the most poverty impacted school.
Thank you, Ms. Hazel. Good afternoon. Our focus area on the most poverty impacted schools identified several focus areas that would impact not only students, but communities, families, and caregivers. And our 2.5 group determined that it would be critical to provide services that are community specific and therefore would require outreach and input from stakeholders to identify what community specific needs there may be. And on this slide, what you will see is an overview of some of the priority areas that our group identified. So for the first 4 bullets, you will see that the trauma-informed therapist and school psychologist, to the counselors, to the parent community coordinators, liaisons, and mental health resources. That resonated with the group over and over again. And as a co-lead, who is also the Associate Superintendent of Human Resources and Development, our team very quickly realized that the strategic recruiting, engagement, and retention of the mental health professionals that we are getting into our district is going to be critical. So we do have a growing recruiting team in HR. Happy to announce we have 2 full-time recruiters now. We are not only looking for wonderful diversity in the teacher workforce, but we are looking for diversity across all job classifications. And with a concentrated focus and effort on mental health professionals, most especially for the coming year, we know we have our work cut out for us and have hit the ground running looking for those mental health professionals across the country through recruiting fairs and through ways that we have been able to leverage online job fairs throughout the country and throughout the region. Pardon me. Professional learning for administrators, teacher level positions, and other support professionals. This is also critically important. As Ms. Hazel referenced in the previous slide, identifying the appropriate professional development for our staff, all staff in the school building, who need to be oriented around what is social emotional learning, what is trauma-informed learning, the connections and the collaboration with Dr. Rubin and her team in the family services team is really going to be about how this work dovetails. You will hear throughout the afternoon there is some overlap in the work that we are doing, and that is critical to our communication, collaboration, and coordination efforts that Dr. McKnight spoke to at the beginning of the session. And lastly, early childhood access and expansion with public and private partnerships. Also rooted in all of this, I would like to also bring to the attention of the council that a really important part of our conversation for the focus on most poverty impacted schools was traditionally the staffing model, that is identifying and determining which schools got what level of staffing in terms of FTEs, right? So full-time positions and or part-time positions was really based on an enrollment numbers. And so one of the things that came out of our discussion was, can we flip the script on that? And can we really focus on need as opposed to just enrollment? Taking into account what I started off with, which was the discussion around identifying what the community needs, asking, being very focused on the needs assessment that we will do, asking community members what wraparound services they need, what helps them to be better caregivers, what do the families and the communities need. So this was the overarching theme was, is it possible for us to look at not just an enrollment algorithm or an enrollment formula, but can we really focus on need? And so that came out of our discussion on the most poverty impacted schools. So that is a high-level overview of our work. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Cevanini, who will be talking about the digital learning and support.
Thank you, Dr. Nixon. Our committee has mostly been focused on our major short-term initiative, our virtual academy. Called Montgomery Virtual is a new virtual learning model for MCPS students that focuses on 2 different programs. The first is elementary and middle school that mirrors the traditional school environment with respect to time and curriculum. And for high school students, we plan to offer classes during 3 different periods, morning, afternoon, and evening, to create more flexibility for our student needs. We have reached to date almost 900 applications so far, which is about 0.5% of our student population. So it sounds like a lot, but it's not really that much yet. We have been working to ensure that all of our families are aware of Montgomery Virtual by providing many different types of outreach, including pop-up events that you've heard about, district-wide emails and phone calls home, and parent webinars in multiple languages. We continue to support the work on Montgomery King Code, which is the vision of Councilmember Rice, and provides computer coding camp to over 1,000 students each summer. We will be using ESSER 3 money to further expand this work. Our future work on the committee ensures it will focus on professional development for our teachers and reimagining our work environment in the modern world. I will now turn it over to Ms. Rubin, who will discuss well-being support. Ms. Rubin?
Thank you, Mr. Chevanini. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here for our priority around well-being support. Our work group was able to come up with summer and fall strategies as to how we would like to ensure that our students, staff, and community members are well supported, especially with the upcoming full return to school 5 days a week in the fall. So first up, we all recognize that when we discuss social emotional needs coupled with the pandemic and a variety of significant issues that have come forward in our society, we know that we're talking about a very complex issue. And so the priorities that you see listed here really seek to address these issues in a meaningful and substantive way. So first up is our social emotional learning curriculum. We were actually pleased to be able to share work that was in progress and really work with the group to see, were we online with the work? Are we on track? And this was a robust group of stakeholders that came together for the social emotional learning work group. We're happy and excited to say that we were able to select a vendor, and we actually start social emotional learning tier 1 this summer for all schools, as well as 80 identified schools who will be in that first phasing of the social emotional learning curriculum. Next up, the identification of social workers as a need, wellness coordinators, and coaches, which are built into this budget to address the need of students as well as staff. And that's where you're going to see, to Councilmember Jawando's earlier point, this is a multi-pronged approach to really address all of our stakeholders. And so when we talk about those wellness coordinators and coaches who will work in an intentional way in our school buildings to make sure that we're identifying the needs as well as the supports for our staff members. An increase in school counselors and psychologists in elementary and secondary schools. This is with a direct focus on both of the counselors and the psychologists being able to provide those direct services to students, right? And how meaningful, both for the issues that we can anticipate as well as for those that we cannot. We are also excited about our contractual services that we have created a model for this year, identifying schools where there's a mental health desert in that community. The supports may not readily be there. And these, our external partners are certified mental health experts who provide direct services, not only to our students, but to their families if the need is identified and there. We have 10 schools currently in that model, with an additional 4 being added in the fall. And then finally here, stipends to promote staff wellness. How can we incentivize that, promote that in a meaningful way so that we really see that spread across all 208 of our schools? Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. And so as we think about the work and how we really have made a yeoman's effort to ensure that we're partnered across agency and space, there were 2 priorities that we really wanted to mention. The first is our work with council members, with HHS and Montgomery County Police, the Student Voice Group, SWAG as they're known, the Student Wellbeing Action Group, and the work around reimagining school safety in Montgomery County. And so that particular group, the student leaders, have identified some priorities that are listed here. Key among them is student voice, a resounding call for there to be a built-in intentional opportunity for students to contribute to the well-being of disciplinary issues, as well as culture, climate, and curriculum, which you also see listed there as well. Next is also a focus on behavioral health and student outreach. How do we really center student mental health, emotional health, and well-being within our schools? How do we create that culture? And how do we differentiate that from disciplinary issues? Or how, when disciplinary issues arise, do we really dig to the root of the problem, which our data has illustrated is often something along that continuum of a social emotional problem, or something that requires a little bit more detail, or perhaps the services of a therapist or mental health professional to help to address that. And then finally, police and discipline, that particular subgroup working on exactly what does the police presence look like in schools and the disciplinary output of that. So certain things from our student code of conduct. But more importantly, something that has come up here is how do we redefine that narrative and that relationship between the police and certain members of our community. There is an interest in intentionally looking at that and working on that throughout the school year. Subsequently, the phased implementation of these recommendations and really a focus on how we do an analysis impact tool so that we don't just come up with the recommendations. This group was also very much interested in how can they stay in the conversation and really look at the impact that those recommendations might be having, and then process enhance as they go. I also wanted to mention here the restorative justice work, a significant component in discussion for this particular group, and happy to say that the restorative justice training for the summer has already been taken by over 500 middle school teachers, 287 high school teachers, and about 197 elementary participants. The other priority that's here relates to our newly arriving students, the unaccompanied minor response plan, which is also a multi-agency group and steering committee that's working on providing a cohesive and a robust interagency coordinated effort around how we receive our students and their families, how we welcome them into our school buildings, and how we go forward throughout the year to support not only their educational needs, but their social emotional needs, maybe some environmental needs that they have. And you see there in that next bullet around nutrition, legal services, just other some of the needs may be related to the pandemic, but really how do we conduct that assessment as they're incoming into our district and make sure that we meet those needs and we continue to follow the students and the families throughout the year to provide that intentional and sustainable support. We know how significant that is, especially at the high school level, where we want to be intentional about ensuring that those students are able to graduate and that there are no mitigating circumstances that would prevent that, such as work. So building in opportunities there that address those needs and requirements is a part of our work and the plan and the model that we're working to create. And certainly you heard Dr. McKnight speak to the importance of this newcomer coordinator that would be in our proposal, both on the MCPS side as well as on the HHS side. And how do we continue to cohort throughout the year? And how do we build in a model that says once we're past the point and we have the enrollment up and going and our students are firmly ensconced in schools, how do we continue to look at that educational piece and that familial piece to make sure that they stay there, that the sustainability is there, and that we actually see the return on investment from these roles that we are proposing. And so with that, at this time, I would like to turn it back over to Dr. McKnight.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin. And I will close out our presentation. I will reintroduce myself as Monifa McKnight, not Linda Farrell. She came to the rescue so that I was able to join by video. But I will close us out really just saying that this last slide is to build the center of our priority around everything that we heard today comes back to our bottom line commitment. And that is that we are a school system that really puts our students and their needs first. That has to be the mindset that we have now and we have moving forward. And that has to be the center to our student needs, really driving all of our decision-making in the system. So that's where we are. I will continue to say you should, our hope was that you were able to see that in a lot of the structures that we've presented today and a lot of the priorities, and how it really does give us an eye towards meeting our students' needs as we've identified where those needs are right now. And we will continue to identify as our students come back into our buildings in the fall. As discussed today, some of the things that you saw outlined in this chart are truly complex, but at the same time evolving. I'll go back to what I said earlier. As we implement all of these plans, we have to constantly ask the question to one another, based on implementation, what have we learned? What's the impact? And that's why the data has to be and will be centered in every single thing that we do, because that helps us determine what we need to continue, stop, and possibly start. So the things in this chart you'll see are really focused on our students' learning, their academic progress, their social emotional learning, and those out of school time domains that we're going to continue to build on to provide flexibilities to our students and our families. So with our goal of meeting students where they are in the fall, our commitment is that we'll continue to equitably distribute our resources. We've talked about how we've done that today through a lot of the funding sources that have been granted to us, and how those sources will allow us to meet our students' need while asking whether our investments are reaping the benefits that we really want to achieve in our students and their learning. And most importantly, them feeling a sense of belonging in our school system and preparing them for college and career readiness. So we'll end here. We look forward to coming back in the fall and sharing with you what some of the data is that speaks to the success of these programs and what we learn and how we'll need to pivot based on what we learn. And more specifically, how the grant funding will continue to be used to address those areas of need. So I will turn it over at this time to Councilmember Rice to engage in any other further discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. McKnight. And so let me turn to Councilmember Jawando first. He had a question.
Thank you very much. Great job. You guys have done I can already tell, just really yeoman's work on putting all this together, and really appreciate. Just wanted to ask Ms. Rubens, thank you for giving us the public, for the millions watching at home, as I'd like to say, an update on SWAG and the group. One of the things related to that, you had the money kind of resources piece TBD, and certainly understandable. I know Councilmember Rice and I and the entire council have said, we are eagerly awaiting to hear the recommendations so that we can make robust investments in those areas. But I do want to say, going back to that first slide that Dr. McKnight shared, you all have received quite a bit of money, and it's going to different areas and important in usage. Do you have any preliminary thinking about how much out of what you've received directly that you might allocate or reserve for that work?
So I will start by saying we absolutely have listed areas of priority, and this is one area. We knew there would be significant changes, and we knew there would be funding sources that are needed here. We have not identified a dollar amount. What we did want to drive were the recommendations first. Sure. I mean, quite frankly, we have flexibility here. And so we felt like we started with a particular dollar amount that may limit us in terms of really thinking about what we need to do. So we recognize that. And then we also know, particularly for our from our SWAG students' recommendations and the work group, we will be implementing this in phases. What do we want to start with in the fall and implement? And that there will be a dollar amount set to that. But we also know there will be parts of that program and what we develop that will need to be implemented in the spring and beyond. And so acknowledging up front that the funding will need to be ongoing, not to put pressure on ourselves to say we need to figure it all out at the onset and spend some time, phasing it out, is another reason we didn't come up with a dollar amount. But we have designated that as a priority in how we will be utilizing some of our grant money. And I say that because as we will come back and talk about the impact of this program, as well with others, we will soon not want it to get lost on us of how we will continue to have some of these models in place beyond the grant funding.
Right. Absolutely. The sustainability is key. And, it's one of the reasons when we worked on the restorative justice money that we put forward, I'm really happy that we will now bake that into the budget, right? And for many of these things, we're going to need to do that. So just underscoring, I knew you were going to say that, but I wanted you to say it and not come from me, that it will be a partnership. You will have skin in the game with using all that money, and we will have to figure out together a sustainability plan going forward, obviously along with the board and you all implementing. So I just wanted to call that out and really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Mr. White.
Well, thank you very much. No, I appreciate it. So let's do this. We will follow up in terms of getting some more details in terms of what else we need to do regarding the budgetary constraints that we know the school system has in terms of its expenditures, as well as what it still will need to do to meet the needs of our students. So we look forward to continuing these conversations into the future. Really just want to thank all of you for your continued great work. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to Montgomery College. And so we're going to start with our next item, which is COVID-19 relief funding and operations update. We have Ms. Susan Madden, Chief Government Relations Officer, Dr. Sanjay Rai, Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, Liz Greeny, David Sears, and Rose Garvin. And so we will turn it over to Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez to walk us through the packet again.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone from Montgomery College for attending today's afternoon session on the relief funding and operations update. Similar to MCPS, Montgomery College also has a presentation to share with the committee. So I will just note that the staff report does include information on the COVID-19 relief funding that has been available. It was also shared during the committee's budget work session, and it also includes the second section on the summer and fall operations. But I will turn to Montgomery College. I know that Mr. Sears is presenting, but if anyone wanted to make any opening comments beforehand, and then we can start. Okay, well, Mr. Sears, if you'd like to get started, I'm pretty sure you're able to share your screen, but let us know if you have any problems. And okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen right now. Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Dr. Rai and I are honored to be here and to give you an update on the college's use of federal funds during the pandemic. And Dr. Rai will be here to give you an update on our operations ongoing. At the outset, I want to thank people like Rose and Liz who are here today, and Rich Sirkovnik and our entire senior leadership team that played a critical and vital role in this entire effort. So as you look at the college's strategic use of the federal funding, we've received more than $74 million in federal funds, known as the Higher Education Emergency Relief Act funds. And those grants came through three different acts. One was CARES, one was CARISA, and one was ARP. The spending of these funds is guided by a student-centered framework while also adhering to the federal grant regulations. The college has used 5 strategic goals to guide us in terms of how we would spend those funds. So focus on health and safety of our students and employees and college community, obviously student success, access and quality for students, workforce development, and community service. The U.S. Department of Education has regulations for the uses of these funds, and they're broken into 2 elements: student emergency assistance and the institutional portion of the grants. On the student emergency assistance side, the focus of the use of those funds is to support a student's cost of attendance. In the beginning, those funds were very limited in terms of the type of students that were eligible, particularly Title IV eligible students. But the latest iterations of the HERF monies is allowing for it to now support dual enrolled students, non-credit, undocumented, DACA, Dreamer, and international students. With respect to the international portion, the regulations are a bit more extensive. The funds have to be used to defray expenses associated with the virus, carry out student support activities, make additional awards to students, implement evidence-based practices to monitor and suppress the virus, and to conduct direct outreach to financial aid applicants. This is an overview of our federal grants from each of those three acts. The CARES Act funds was 10.9 million, CRRSA funds at 23 million, and ARP Act is over $40 million. One of the most important things to note here is that the college will spend at least 42% of these funds on student emergency assistance. CARES Act was the first iteration of HERF that we received. That was 10.99 million, and 63% of that was spent on student emergency assistance. We also made sure that students received reimbursement for canceled classes. In addition, faculty received professional development on how to teach successfully in remote and hybrid and face-to-face instruction environments. And more than $2 million was expended on technology, such as laptops and other critical technology needs for remote work, teaching, and learning. So all of those funds from CARES has already been expended by the college on those areas. So as we look forward, the college has $63 million in CRRSA and ARP funds, so HERF 2 and HERF 3, as we describe them. The college will be expending at least $25.8 million on student emergency assistance from HERF 2 and HERF 3. Students will also receive support related to student debt and outreach related to financial aid. The college will use the institutional portion of these funds for improving HVAC and HVAC and air filtration systems, as well as personal protective equipment for mental health services, and also for COVID-19 prevention, such as masks, sanitizers, and antibacterial wipes. To support student success, the college is creating high-flex learning spaces on all three campuses that allow for better hybrid teaching and learning environments. The college is expanding and strengthening its Wi-Fi capacity for students, as well as creating a laptop program to ensure that those students without laptop computers can access them. College will also continue to provide professional development for faculty and staff to support remote and hybrid learning and teaching, and also to provide additional student supports. For each approved use of the federal funds for the institutional purposes, the college has been intentional in seeking its Board of Trustees approvals and made requests for supplemental appropriations. This chart reflects the timing of the past, present, and future requests. Note that the student emergency assistance funds do not require appropriations. In summary, the college has used a combination of a student-centered framework, 5 guiding goals, and the federal regulations to determine how to expend the $4.5 million in HERF funds. The college has until May 17th, 2022 to expend the HERF 2 funds and has until June 20th, 2022 to expend the HERF 3 funds. As noted earlier, we have an exceptional team of experts monitoring the grant processes, the expenditures, and compliance with the federal regulations. Again, a significant portion of these funds will be spent on direct student emergency assistance, at least 42%. In closing, I want to share a brief mission moment to make these funds a little bit more relatable for you. In the early days of the pandemic, we had an international student whose family had lost their jobs and the student had lost her own. And because of the limitations of the funds, The college had to find ways through its foundation and nonprofits and county resources to try and help this student stay in school. And unfortunately, the student emailed me back and said she appreciated the support, but it just was not enough. Recently, now with HERF 3 being able to available for international students, we had a student in a similar situation, but this time we were able to allocate MC Foundation monies to enroll the student in Summer 1 and Summer 2, while the HERF 3 monies will provide his emergency needs for food and rent. He emailed me back yesterday and he said that, Mr. Sears, I'm able to stay in school for the both sessions of summer school, and I will be able to graduate at the end. And he thanked me for the support that he received from the federal funds, the college, and the MC Foundation. And this is the kind of outcome that we're hoping for each time we provide this type of support. So I thank you for listening. And now I want to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Sanjay Rai, to give you an update on our operations. Sanjay?
Yeah, so Dave, you can give us the screen back. I don't have a PowerPoint.
All set.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and others, for giving us an opportunity to provide an update on our summer and fall operations. So just to give you a context, our schedule for summer and fall is built in January and February of this year. So that students have enough time to register for classes March, April, May, June, and plan accordingly. College's leadership team used our mission, our students, science and data, and the health and safety of all as the basis of those decisions. Think about the situation in January and February. Certainly hope was on the horizon that vaccines are coming up and things may look better, but some level of chaos still reigned. When the schedule was created in February, we paid attention to the content and pedagogy of the disciplines that we were planning to teach in summer and fall. And accordingly, all our science lab classes or all other high-touch classes were scheduled to be on campus for fall semester. Now, as the public health has improved with high vaccination rates and low infection rates, it has provided us opportunity to add more on-campus classes. We treat our students as customers. Those who have registered for remote classes in March, April, May, or even in June, and have planned their lives around that schedule, we will not change those classes. We have added additional face-to-face classes, several, in almost every discipline for students who are only able to take face-to-face classes or students who prefer face-to-face classes. We are providing flexibility to students in this time of transition with face-to-face classes, distance learning classes, and also structured remote classes. We are constantly watching enrollment in all our classes. We will add classes in response to students' demand. If a student demand more face-to-face classes, we are committed to providing more classes. Our learning centers and libraries will be open, and they will provide support to students on campus, and they will continue to provide online support as well. What we have learned during the pandemic, that a large number of our students take advantage of online tutoring, particularly when it is given in the evening weekend hours. We have decided on a gradual return process to monitor data, provide employees with a way to ease back into in-person work, and continue to support students and employees in a safe manner. We started with administrators returning to campus part-time beginning last week, to be joined by staff beginning July 6th. By August 2nd, all staff employees are required to work on site at least 2 days a week, with faculty working according to schedule of their classes. All offices, units, and service areas will have a staffing plan in place to ensure 100% access to support, service, and operations. By August 23rd, faculty will return to fall semester with classes beginning August 30th. Workforce Development is offering nearly 200 courses in person. I am very pleased to share that the entire early college program will return to campus this fall, all 600 students. As you know, this program has been expanding annually, and we are adding a new biotechnology program starting this fall. We had 125 graduates this May with both an associate degree from Montgomery College and a high school diploma from MCPS. This is up from 45 last May, and certainly during a pandemic. We anticipate that 325 dually enrolled students in the early college, middle college, and PTech programs will graduate with an associate degree and high school diploma in 2022. The largest graduation of dually enrolled students in the state. This summer, the college is offering structured remote and distance learning classes. We are hosting the Biotechnology Boot Camp, which serves displaced workers in Montgomery County. And certainly, Montgomery Can Code is serving approximately 1,000 middle school students again this summer, all across Montgomery County. Our quest for excellence continued during the pandemic. 10 programs and 2 certificates have been accepted by NASAD, which accredits schools of arts and design nationally. Only 25 community colleges in the country are accredited by them. The cybersecurity program, our cybersecurity program, has moved to phase 2 of the National Center for Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity accreditation. Our nursing program has the highest NCLEX pass rate of 92%, more than many years, and that too during the pandemic. On a final note, college had a very successful transition to remote teaching and learning, which has been seen in student evaluations and also in nationwide Sense survey. This gradual return to in-person classes and campus life needs to be equally successful. Planning for something unpredictable is challenging, but thoughtful conversations focus on health and safety, as well as the needs of our students, will keep us moving in the right direction. With your support and guidance, Montgomery College will continue to provide economic and social mobility to all residents of our county. Thank you.
So I don't see any questions for my colleagues. Let me just say this, that I want to thank Montgomery College for continuing to be a leader when it comes to really looking at ways to continue to innovate in the post-secondary space. It really is one, whether it's Montgomery Code, whether it's working with MCPS on additional opportunities for folks to obtain their associate's degree while still in high school. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we know are crusading for equity amongst all of our students. So really just want to continue to applaud you for putting that great work to the number. So thank you for that.
I have a quick question.
Councilmember Joando, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No, I didn't text you. No problem. Thank you, Dr. Rai and team. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Good to see you all, Mr. Sears and Rose and Ms. Griani. You guys are awesome. I know you're in a bit of transition, but you stay on track because you've had great leadership and you continue to implement that, and all of your team has been excellent. I really was happy to read and hear about what you're doing to support students who need help. That's really, really an important aspect of this. As I continue to say, the Montgomery College in particular, all of our institutions of higher education, the University of Shady Grove, obviously our state system, but particularly the role that you all are going to play here in Montgomery County in an equitable recovery and how we come out of this in a way, and our students have the skills, those who need retraining, get that retraining, being able to be nimble and help us in that effort. I feel really good about us being poised and ready to do that. And you talked about the emergency aid. I did want to ask just on that point, and you touched on it, but just how are you looking at how it's distributed in an equitable manner and tracking that process? And how do you expect to, do that going forward? What are you looking at into the fall? So I guess first question would be how you're tracking, is it just who comes and asks for it? Are you being specific and targeting who you're reaching out to? Just if you could talk a little bit about that, whoever's appropriate.
Well, I can start, and then Liz and Rose and Sanjay can follow up. So we have an application process for the students to be able to request those funds. We've been able to be able to distribute it to more than, I believe, 5,000 students. We've been able to distribute it based on whether they were full-time or part-time students. So they got different levels of support based on their how they were enrolled. In addition, we have other supports through the MC Foundation. So if that support is not enough, students can request through the MC Foundation to get support as well. But we've been able to reach a very broad and large group of students, and we have a very expansive communications program to be able to communicate to the students across different platforms to make them aware about how they request it. And I'll ask Rose or Liz or Sanjay if they want to expand on that.
So certainly, students, when they need help, they know how to get the financial help. That happens one way. Our financial aid office has a pretty good understanding. They follow the data, which students are lagging, which students are not able to pay their bills, which students came in the fall, but they have not registered for the spring semester. So they proactively follow up with the students. Very strong advising and counseling program. Students go for advising and counseling. Our advisors and counselors also give students information. Hey, if you're having an issue with payment, you can go and get help this way, that way. Very happy to see that now international students and DACA students can also receive this support. I came as an international student, how much things have changed, let's celebrate that. So international student advisors are there, international student support office is there. They are aware of new policies and they reach out to students, they give them new information that's available. So there are different ways of reaching out to students and informing them about these great resources that are available for them now.
That's great. Thank you. I don't know if there's that's totally suffices. And that's a great answer. On the return to in-person, just to be clear, I know there are some, I think you covered this, but just I've been getting the question a lot. You have some schools that are requiring vaccination. That is not our policy, my understanding. So could you someone just clearly and concisely state the policy of Montgomery College for in-person learning?
Our policy is strong. Vaccinations are strongly encouraged. As you know, our county, the infection rates are very, very low. So on-campus students who are coming for on-campus classes, they are not required to have vaccinations.
Okay, great. But I will say, and I know Councilmember Rice, I can channel him. We want you to get vaccinated, and it's one of the reasons that Montgomery County leads the nation. And
Amen.
Yeah, amen. That's right. And leads the nation in counties over 300,000 with 70+% of our 12 population vaccinated. So we want to keep that going.
We agree. We agree with that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We're also, as you know, we're a state vaccination site at the Germantown campus, but we are working with a healthcare provider on creating pop-up vaccination sites on the other two campuses as well.
That's great. Do you have a time? Do you have a timeline on that?
I would say we'll be able to announce something probably in the next 2 weeks or so.
Okay, wonderful. Great.
Councilman,
yeah, go ahead.
We're also going to partner with the county to do the same thing. once the Germantown location isn't necessary anymore. We'll repurpose that energy and put some folks on our campuses, not only for our student population and staff population, but for the community as well.
Absolutely. Great. I had heard about that. I'm glad to hear that confirmed. And, really appreciate just all that you all have done. As you know, I was a Montgomery College student this semester online, and the experience went swimmingly, and really appreciate all the work of your faculty and staff through the pandemic and supporting students. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're on mute if you're talking. Okay, maybe he's.
Sorry about that. No, I got it. Thank you. So I think that we're good. Let me just reiterate something that Councilmember Jawando said when it comes to about being more than just an educational institution, and having the ability to be able to focus on health is incredibly important. And so to be able to do both of those things and continue to deliver on so many fronts for the community is something that's incredibly important, whether it's the hospital, but then also understanding that we also have the immunization process when it comes to COVID. You guys continue to deliver. And so just want to thank you for stepping up like that. So I don't see any other questions. So I think that we are squared away. Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez, have we left anything out?
Nope, I think everything was covered. Thank you so much, everyone from Montgomery College.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.